Hello, hunters, and welcome back to Super Fan Natural. Immortality. It's something that humanity has sought after since we first learned about the concept of death. It's not hard to see why. Dying is scary, especially in our boring real world where nobody is really sure what happens afterwards. Except me, of course. In the world of Supernatural, life after death is a real thing, and you might be tempted to think that that makes forever life less desirable, right? Well, turns out your afterlife options aren't the best. Heaven is an eternal rerun of your best memories, alone. Hell is, well, hell. Purgatory is a non-stop battlefield, and while you can choose to just not go to the afterlife, that leaves you as a ghost, trapped haunting a world that you can see but not really touch. Beyond the subpar afterlife, there's plenty of other reasons to want to live forever. Fortunately, for the inhabitants of this fictional world, immortality is not only possible, there's more than one way to achieve it. In this video, I'll discuss all the ways one could go about spitting in death's face. Well, I'll try to get to all of them, but there's a good chance I'll miss one or two because there's a lot of methods in this show. The first, and arguably easiest way to become immortal is to become a monster. There are a whole bunch of monsters in Supernatural, and while each race is different, one feature that many share is an extended or even infinite lifespan. Unfortunately, the strongest and toughest types of monsters are born, not made. However, there are a few species that regular humans can be turned into. For example, the undead bloodsuckers known as Nakzer can turn people with just a single bite. However, they're incredibly reclusive, so good luck finding one. There are other monsters with infectious bites like werewolves, arachne, and skinwalkers. However, we don't know if any of them come with immortality. However, there is one species that's immortal, fairly easy to find, and capable of transforming humans. That would be vampires. Unlike other monsters, vampires don't infect via bites. Instead, they turn people by feeding them their blood. So, all you gotta do is sip down a few drops of vamp blood, and wham! You stop aging, become immune to most forms of injury and disease, and get a nice boost to your strength, speed, and senses. Now, it's true that you'll have to start feeding on blood, but it doesn't necessarily have to be human, as we've seen several vamps survive off of animal blood. Another perk to Supernatural's vampires is that sunlight isn't lethal to them. It does sting like a bitch, but it won't necessarily burn them, so if you can live with a little pain, then you can actually maintain some degree of a normal life. Still, all monsters have a weakness, and vamps are no exception. They can tank a lot of damage that would put down normal humans, but there is a limit. Getting beheaded or cursploded will kill a vampire, and if they've completed the transformation by feeding on even a single drop of blood, then they've locked themselves out of every afterlife except one. Every single monster descended from Eve goes to purgatory after death, where they hunt and fight each other in a dark Canadian forest forever. That might sound okay to some, but it's important to remember that even though the monsters in purgatory are already dead, they can still die again, with no clear answer given as to what happens afterwards. So, becoming a vampire or other monster lets you stop worrying about the march of time, but it doesn't make you unkillable, and if you do end up getting got, then you're going to a place where you don't just have to fight for your life, you may just be defending your very existence. Okay, so maybe becoming a monster isn't for you. There is another death-dodging option that's fairly easy, however this one comes with significantly more downsides. Throughout the Supernatural multiverse, there's plenty of creatures that can't manifest physically on Earth. So, if they want to interact with the material world, they've got to possess a human body. In many cases, a possessed body will stop aging and become functionally immortal, allowing the being inside to keep piloting the same meat suit for a very long time. For example, the demon Asmodeus had seemingly been wearing the same vessel since biblical times, yet it still looked like a regular dude in his 40s, besides the scar and the Colonel Sanders suit. They also become capable of tanking most mortal damage, and if you're still in there with them, then you'll survive so long as your soulmate sticks around. So, if you're really that scared of dying, then you could always try summoning an angel or a demon and offer them your body. Now, to be fair, not all possessions require the host's soul to remain inside their body. A demon could just kill you, then take your uninhabited vessel, rendering the whole ordeal counterproductive. Even if they let you stick around, your eternal life will be as a passenger, forced to watch a demon do whatever they want with your face and hands. Angels do actually need the host to be alive, since they need permission in order to jump inside someone, and if the host starts to regret their arrangement, then they can't expel the angel and prevent them from getting back in. So that's a pretty good deal, right? Well, your experience will really depend on the angel you summon. Not only is there no guarantee that you'll be physically compatible with any particular angel, even if you find one that can wear you, they'll probably suppress your consciousness so that you can't evict them. We saw Gadriel put Sam's mind into a dream state, And at that point, are you really any better than you would be in heaven? Also, there's nothing to suggest that angels couldn't put your mind into a nightmare, at which point, are you really any better than you would be in hell? There are other forms of possession, but most are more difficult to get a hold of and don't necessarily grant the very few benefits of angelic or demonic body snatching. Possession is an iffy option at best, but it's not the only way to get immortality from spiritual beings. We've seen that both angels and demons can make people immortal without jumping inside them. We saw at least 2 examples of angels extending the lives of humans well beyond their normal lifespan. Firstly, Metatron was able to keep members of the Twin Rivers tribe alive for hundreds of years in exchange for a steady stream of books and stories. For a more extreme example, there's Seraphina and her boyfriend Adam, who she kept ticking since biblical times. Yes, this is the Adam, the biblical first man. We don't know exactly how long he's been around since the show is pretty vague and inconsistent when it comes to history, but if we take his words literally, then he's at least 300,000 years old, all thanks to his angel girlfriend. So that's it, right? This has to be the best option. And honestly, yeah, it very well could be one of the best paths to immortality, if you can find an angel who's willing to help you out. The 2 examples we have were both renegades, with one giving long life as a reward for service and the other using it to keep her lover around. Even if you do find a willing donor, it's worth keeping in mind that we don't actually know if angelic immortality is a one-and-done bestowal or if it works through constant healing. If it's the latter, then you'll have to depend on your new angel friend forever. So, getting immortality from an angel is a pretty tricky endeavor, but maybe it'll be a little easier squeezing it out of a demon. After all, demons are much more common on Earth, and they have a whole industry around making deals and granting wishes. We know that they can make someone immortal, however, getting one to do so is gonna be real tough since it kind of defeats the entire purpose of a demon deal, at least on their end. The whole reason as to why Hellspawn grant wishes is so that they can drag the recipient's soul into the pit after they die. So, giving a client eternal life means that hell will never see a return on its investment. Still, we know that demons can dish out forever life, as we saw from a man named Luther Shrike. This dude was able to, let's say, convince a Crossroads demon to make it so that as long as he was on his property, Luther wouldn't age and he wouldn't be killed by physical damage. Now, when I say he convinced the demon, I actually mean he threatened him. Luther was only able to secure this deal by finding the demon Barthemus's earthly remains and threatening to burn them, thus killing him. As you might expect, this royally peeved Bart, so he spent the next century scheming to get his revenge, and eventually he sort of succeeded. So yeah, even if you somehow manage to force a demon to let you live forever, you'll almost certainly have to spend a good chunk of that time looking over your shoulder and expecting infernal retribution. Alright, so that pretty much covers how one would go about getting gifted eternal life from heaven or hell, and as you can see, neither are particularly simple. However, there is one more entity known to dish out a long lifespan, that being the Mayan god Cacao. Apparently, Cacao once gave a Mayan warrior a form of immortality that kept his body in peak shape as long as he offered up a couple human sacrifices every year. Not only did this allow him to remain alive and young for centuries, it also gave him near superhuman levels of strength and speed. Honestly, if you don't mind killing people, this is a pretty sweet deal, arguably one of the best on the list. You're probably waiting for me to drop some kind of horrible downside, but honestly, there really isn't one besides the murder. I mean, this method doesn't come with any kind of invulnerability or regenerative powers, meaning its users can still be taken out with physical damage, but that's true of most entries on this list. The biggest problem with this form of immortality is that you might have a really hard time figuring out how to get it. Inyo apparently needed to go through a Mayan priest to get in touch with Cacao, and obviously, those are in pretty short supply these days. It's also worth noting that we never actually saw Cacao, nor hear about him outside of the one episode, so we don't even know if he's actually real. There's a distinct possibility that the priest granted Inyo's powers himself and either lied or genuinely believed it was made possible thanks to a god. As we've seen, it's pretty tricky finding another entity who's willing to dish out immortality. Now, let's move on to ways that you could extend your own life with your own power and skill. If you're a human seeking supernatural power, then there's no better place to look than witchcraft. With the right combination of talent and know-how, witches can pull off a whole variety of sick tricks, with one that we saw from multiple mages being the Defiance of Death. One advantage to going the witch route is that you aren't beholden to one method. We saw a variety of spells and techniques for extending and protecting one's life. So, while magic and witchcraft take time and effort to master, doing so gives you a bunch of options for dodging death. Firstly, there are several spells that allow you to freeze or manipulate your age. The witch Patrick knew a spell that allowed him to transfer years of aging from one person to another, allowing him to keep or make one person young at the expense of another person getting old. Another witch used a spell to specifically revert adults back into children so that she could eat them. While the witch in question used this spell on her victims, there's nothing to suggest that you couldn't de-age yourself, meaning that as long as you have the ingredients to make the required hex bags, you could theoretically just turn yourself back into a young adult every few years, forever. Now, neither of these methods grant the user a resistance to murder. However, there is a spell for that. Rowena was famous for her resurrection sashes, little miniature hex bags that would revive and heal the user if they were killed, essentially making them extra lives. Now, in order for this to work, you have to make the sashes ahead of time and implant them under your skin, but once in place, they're capable of undoing a crazy amount of damage. Also, while unconfirmed, it is possible that the bags have anti-aging powers as well. Like several other witches, Rowena was able to slow or stop her aging and extend her life for hundreds of years through an unspecified means, and since she already had several of these puppies inside her throughout the show, it's possible that this is also her method for fighting off time. The last method that we saw a witch use to stay alive was basically making a Horcrux. The legendary witch Baba Yaga was able to gain immortality through the use of a magic ring that acted as her heart, meaning that so long as it remained intact, she couldn't die. It's not clear if she made the ring through obscure sorcery or if it was a gift from a higher being, but whatever the case, it seemed pretty effective. There are probably other spells that I'm forgetting, but still, you can see that witchcraft offers a number of avenues for evading age and injury. The catch here should be pretty obvious. You have to be or befriend a fairly competent witch in order to make any of this work. Even if you do everything right, it's important to remember that none of these methods make you unkillable. Even if you give yourself 1,000 extra lives and a Horcrux ring as a backup, you still have to watch out for those extra strong beings like archangels and primordials, things that have the power and time to chip away at your defenses until eventually you run out of saves. While we're on the subject of spellcasting, let's discuss a magical method that's similar to witchcraft, but uses a slightly different kind of power than that which is wielded by witches. In Supernatural, angels are able to use a form of magic that humans normally don't have access to. However, after years of studying the God Squad, a woman named Lily Sunder discovered a way to tap into angel power, which she then used to extend her life, preserve her youth, and heal her body. Immortality isn't the only perk that you get from this magic. If used right, it has the potential to make you one of the most powerful beings in Supernatural. Best seen when Jack Klein was able to use it to destroy an archangel. Pretty sweet, right? Well, as you probably guessed, that incredible power comes with an incredible cost. This magic is fueled by the human soul, and every time it's used, it permanently burns away bits of soul. And yes, you can run out, meaning that this technique can cost you not only your life, but also your afterlife. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't know that you can use this magic to live forever, since you'll eventually run out of soul fuel. So yeah, I guess this one's just a dud. Womp womp. But what if magic just isn't your thing? Well, good news. In the world of Supernatural, it's possible to do the impossible using cold, hard science. Well, sort of. We saw two separate yet similar instances of non-magical-minded mortals fighting fatal frailty with nothing but cursed chemistry and bizarre biology. The slightly more grounded of these mad sciences was developed by the Frankenstein family, or the Steins as they're called in the modern day. Their method of preserving life is fairly straightforward. They remove old and damaged body parts and replace them with fresh, new ones that are usually taken from unwilling victims. They can take the procedure a step further and integrate additional organs into the subject's body, things like extra hearts and muscles to enhance the physical abilities and make them a bit harder to kill. It's worth noting that we don't actually know if this method can extend one's life indefinitely. It's implied that it can, but we don't actually see any Steins that are confirmed to be centuries old, and there's no mention of replacing or preserving the brain. Even if this is a legit path to immortality, it comes with plenty of drawbacks. This is arguably the method with the most upkeep, as you not only have to constantly be securing replacement parts, you also have to have a constant access to someone who's willing and able to perform the surgery. Even if you pull that off, you can still be taken out by a headshot because, again, there doesn't seem to be a way to repair or replace the brain. So yeah, this isn't exactly the best option, but fear not. There is one more method for becoming immortal scientifically. Using unknown science, a mad surgeon named Doc Benton invented some kind of mysterious formula that allowed his body to keep functioning after its organs crapped out. How exactly it works is a bit confusing. Benton continued to age, and like the Steins, he would replace old or damaged body parts with fresh, healthy ones. However, it kind of seemed like he didn't have to do that. Unlike the Franken family, Doc could tank damage to the heart and head and keep going. Honestly, it kind of seems like his formula somehow bound his soul to his body, allowing him to operate like a possessing spirit. However, when Sam took a look at his journal, he said that it was all twisted science rather than magic. Now, to be fair, Sam didn't understand most of the writing, and since we don't know what's included in this formula, it's possible that there is something supernatural involved. But whatever the case, this mysterious method is the only one we didn't see undone. Like, the boys managed to neutralize Benton by burying him, but he was still alive, and we never were given a way to kill him. For all we know, you could chop off his head and chuck him into a wood chipper, and he would still be alive in some messed up way. Honestly, that sounds horrifically awful. Imagine being trapped as an inanimate pile of mulch for all eternity. Yeah, no thank you. Thus far, all the methods that we've discussed have been what you might call defensive in nature, as they all revolve around protecting oneself from things that cause death. Now, let's talk about ways you could keep yourself alive by taking the fight directly to death itself. Within the supernatural universe, death isn't just a process that happens to living beings. It's a grand cosmic force embodied within a sentient being known simply as death, with a capital D. Death is one of the most powerful entities in Supernatural, with a nearly unparalleled ability to give and take life. In fact, the original Death claimed that one day he would reap God. What I'm saying is, if you want to live forever, Death can make it happen. But they probably won't, since doing so would almost certainly upset the vague natural order that exists within the machinery of creation. Luckily, there is actually a way to compel Death to do what you want. Despite their incredible power, Death can still be bound with a weirdly simple spell, allowing the caster to command the primordial being to a pretty crazy degree. When the Winchesters bound Death, Dean claimed that they couldn't be killed, even if, quote, God pulled the trigger. If true, then, well, you don't get much more immortal than that. Now technically, Death didn't confirm that was true, but it probably was, considering that his superpowered Cass chose to undo the binding rather than test his might against the Grand Reaper. As I said before, this spell is strangely easy to perform. It just requires a few ingredients to be mixed together, with the most unusual being a large fulgurite crystal. Once cast, it seems pretty difficult to undo. Death can't unbind himself, and he claimed that Dean wouldn't be able to free him from Lucifer's control, though I guess it is possible that Lucy used a different spell. So, a relatively easy spell that gives you control over Death itself. What's the catch? Well, while Death will do what you ask, he'll also actively work against you in any way that he can. For example, when Lucifer bound him, he not only told Dean how to defeat the Archangel, he gave him the means to do it. He also refused to destroy Chicago despite the fact that he had been sent to do so, implying that he does retain some degree of freedom. There's also the matter of the natural order. See, while Death can manipulate who lives and who dies, they're not really supposed to. Instead, the cycle of life and death is supposed to happen in a, well, natural order with minimal interference. If the order is upset too much, there can be some pretty nasty consequences. On a small scale, it just causes people to die before they were supposed to. However, if things get too gunked up, it can lead to some biblical catastrophes as reality tries to hit the reset button. We don't really know exactly what happens, but the way that the second death ability talks about it, it makes it seem like it wouldn't be good for anyone. Also, if Death manages to get loose from the binding, then oh boy, are you in for a world of hurt. Binding Death is a pretty risky move. But if you don't want to go up against Big D himself, you could always try binding one of his subordinates. Death commands a race of spiritual beings known as Reapers, who collect the souls of the dead and take them to the afterlife. Like their boss, Reapers can be bound with magic and compelled to use their powers to keep people alive unnaturally. Unlike their boss, Reapers don't really have the same broad ability to just stop death from happening. They do have healing powers. However, there's limits to how they're able or maybe willing to heal. So if they're commanded to save someone beyond their limits, they'll have to take the extra life from someone else. Basically, instead of just fixing a dying person, the bound Reaper will take what's killing them and transfer it to someone else, essentially trading one life for another. We only saw this method used to cure terminal illnesses, so I don't actually know if the Reaper can stop or reverse aging. Also, compared to the Death Binding spell, this one is much easier to break. The Reaper Wrangling ritual requires you to build an altar and an amulet, And if both of those are destroyed, then the spell is broken and you are about to be killed by a very angry Reaper. Also, if Big Daddy Death is out and about, then he'll definitely notice you enslave his employee, and he might actually intervene personally, which is indescribably bad. Now, there is one other way that Reapers can be bound in order to keep people from dying. In Season 4, we saw a demon use a spell to capture and bind a town's Reaper in a way that causes the residents to just not die from fatal injuries. The specifics of how it worked were unclear. They just grabbed the guy and tossed him into a binding circle, and then the people in the town just stopped dying. There's a lot of unknowns when it comes to this method, but honestly, I don't think I really have to go into it, because there's absolutely no way that this would work as a long-term death repellent. In fact, it would have the complete opposite effect. More Reapers are going to show up to investigate, and even if you can handle that, then you'll still probably have to deal with their boss at some point, since I'm 1000% sure that this is something that would get them to intervene. So we've covered ways to avoid dying with the power of angels, demons, gods, magic, monsters, science, and even death itself. There's one final method to cover, and I saved it for last because it's arguably the most powerful. Yes, there's something that can make you more unkillable than enslaving the embodiment of death. It is the oldest magic in existence. In fact, it's the very first spell, or rather first curse, ever cast. At the beginning of reality, God wasn't alone. He had a twin known as the Darkness, who was the destruction to his creation. The Darkness would wipe out anything that God tried to create, so if he ever wanted to make anything, he needed to take her out. Unfortunately, he couldn't kill her without breaking reality, so he invented a spell that would seal her away in an inescapable prison. Part of the spell involved manifesting the prison's lock in the form of a magical tattoo known as the Mark, later the Mark of Cain, which then had to always be held by one of God's creations, lest the darkness be let loose. Whoever bears the mark is borderline impossible to kill. In fact, the only confirmed way to put them down is for them to be stabbed with a weapon called the First Blade, wielded by someone else with a copy of the mark, and the only way to get a copy of the mark is from the mark bearer themselves. It's possible that God himself could smite the mark bearer, but we don't know for sure. Besides that, there's absolutely, positively, no way for someone with the mark to die. In fact, it's questionable if death could even do it. Hell, you can't even self-delete if you got the God tat, as this will only turn you into an unkillable demon for some reason. There is a spell to remove the mark, but it's real hard to cast and can only be found in the Book of the Damned, which itself is incredibly hard to get a hold of and is also written in a code that's almost impossible to decipher. As a result of all that, I feel confident declaring the mark to hold the most powerful and resilient form of immortality. But obviously, there are downsides, there always has to be. Firstly, just getting it is going to be a Herculean task, especially since it was removed and destroyed in 2015 via the aforementioned spell. Even before that, it wouldn't have been easy at all. God gave the mark to Lucifer, who gave it to Cain, who held it for millennia before giving it to Dean Winchester. And out of those three, only Lucifer might consider giving it to some rando who wants to cheat death. If you do manage to get a hold of it, buckle up, you're in for quite an emotional roller coaster. Carrying the mark changes people. It elevates their negative emotions and makes them angry, violent, and eventually murderous. These effects can be resisted for a time, but it seems like most people will eventually be overwhelmed and consumed by destructive impulses. Now, if you're already an angry, violent psycho, then this might not seem like much of a price, and fair enough, I guess. But it's important to keep in mind that the mark only makes you unkillable. It doesn't really make you untrappable. If you spend eternity on an unstoppable killing spree, then there's a very good chance that you'll eventually cross someone who has the power to put you somewhere that you can't escape from, like a Malik box or another universe. If that happens, then you'll potentially have to spend the rest of forever stuck somewhere where you can't really do anything except scream. And since you're stuck with the mark, it means you can't even take yourself out. You'll just be trapped, alone, screaming, forever. Also, if the mark does get unmade, then there's a chance that God's sister will sort of imprint on you. And I mean, she looks like Emily Swallow, so that's a win. But if you're already in a committed relationship, things could get a little awkward. There is one more path to immortality I should talk about. For every like and comment that this video gets, I will personally gift one loyal subscriber with ascension to a higher plane of existence, where there's no death, no taxes, no Boise, Idaho. If you can't think of anything to comment, then just let me know your thoughts on the video. Did I miss anything? Which method would you pick? I'll have more juicy videos for you soon, but for now, carry on.